Hi, everybody. Today is October 14th, 2021. You're watching a Yakima Herald-Republic Editorial Board meeting with one of the two candidates for District 6 position on the Yakima City Council. Lisa Wallace is a small business owner who has also worked extensively in juvenile corrections and with local nonprofits. She's currently vice chair of the Yakima Planning Commission. Her opponent, Matt Brown, has declined to participate in the interview. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Wallace here real quickly, and she can introduce herself.
Thank you. My name, like you mentioned, is Lisa Wallace. I was born and raised in Terrace Heights. I graduated from East Valley High School. I went to Washington State University. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and family studies. And I moved away from the area right after college and did a myriad of young person careers. Like I was a flight attendant randomly one year. And when I decided to come back and get serious about my social work career, I came back to Yakima. And my first job actually was in the Kittitas County Prosecutor's Office. And then I moved to the Yakima County Prosecutor's Office, where I did victim services for a few years, and then moved over to the Juvenile Probation Department. I was a juvenile probation officer for quite a few years and then managed the entire juvenile court before leaving to actually do a stint. I don't talk about this as much, I'm not sure why. I actually did a stint with a large grower shipper here in the Valley, where for 3 years I exported apples, pears, and cherries and learned about global exports and the basis of our agriculture economy, and then went back into juvenile justice one more time. My husband and I own a outpatient physical therapy practice, and I do a little bit of nonprofit consulting. That's my professional background.
Sounds busy. Okay, I'll go ahead and get to these questions.
Okay.
I believe we had 3 altogether, and we'll give you about 5 minutes on each one to answer.
Okay.
The first one is affordable housing and homelessness have remained serious issues in Yakima, but affordability and growth are especially significant in District 6. What can the city do to help?
The city can do a lot of things to help. I appreciate the question. So as you mentioned, I'm the vice chair of the Planning Commission, and I'm really proud of the housing action plan that the city championed. While I certainly came in on the tail end of it, I really enjoyed the process of working on that, learning about housing. When I think it's important to talk about that as somebody who worked in social work, when the term affordable housing is sort of thrown around, I think it conjures up images for everyone. And we don't always start with the same definition of affordable housing. So for me, before working in that arena, it conjured up sort of subsidized apartment complexes. And that was really my only frame of reference for affordable housing. And what I've learned over the last year and a half on the Planning Commission is that affordable housing is so much greater than just subsidized apartments. Housing has to be looked at as a ladder or a pie. And chronic homelessness and a housing stock crisis are not necessarily always, they're very closely related, but they're also not always cause and effect. The housing crisis that Yakima is experiencing is across all economic boundaries. One of my professional jobs in our physical therapy clinic is recruiting doctorate level physical therapists. And I can tell you that it is incredibly difficult to recruit healthcare providers currently for a myriad of reasons. One of them being there is nothing to rent or buy. We've had a 0% occupancy rate for quite some time in the rental market. Our rent prices have far outpaced our income levels. District 6 does have affordable housing. The bicycle apartments opened about a year ago, 16 months ago, maybe. And we're full the day before the final nail was even pushed in. What the city can do, in my opinion, is really embrace the housing action plan in all facets of it. So it's important for people that aren't familiar with it to know that it isn't a manual to end homelessness. It is a really not complicated, actually not even complicated, a very sophisticated approach to various aspects of housing. So for example, we had a planning commission meeting yesterday and a study session where we looked at the housing action plan, the part around tiny homes and how we need to embrace all kinds of diverse housing. Tiny homes, cottage homes, micro homes, all these terms that most people aren't familiar with, when really we're talking about creating attainable housing, access to all kinds of housing. Believe it or not, the two groups in Yakima that have the most challenges with regards to housing, I think a lot of people would be surprised to know. Oftentimes we talk about single parent families, but really the two groups that are most challenged in our housing market are seniors and single people. There really is nothing specifically for either of those populations. So one of the things the city can do is look at every single code and barrier that we have to all kinds of development. What we have to do is find creative solutions and incentives to development. The private sector will bear the brunt of most of housing, meaning housing development. I don't think the city of Yakima in any time is going to be going in the business of building. I don't think that's the city's role, but I do think the city's role is very much to remove barriers and find creative ways to incentivize what we need to be thinking of as attainable housing. Not everything needs to be a 4,000 square foot single family home. We need to look at multi-family housing with sort of a fresh, new perspective. I was kind of long-winded. Sorry about that.
It's a big topic.
It is big.
Thank you. Our next question would be, what would you do to ensure that city services are delivered equitably? Specifically, how could you help provide basic services to East Side City residents without giving short shrift to your own district?
Right. Kate and I talked about a little bit about this briefly a while back. You know, that's been an interesting thing to learn more about. I know the city has spent quite a bit of time in years past conducting, I don't know if there are surveys or sort of consultations on what exactly specifically is inequitable. Well, certainly no one is arguing that there are parts of the city that have less access to streetlights, sidewalks, parks, basic essential services that the city of Yakima needs to provide. In District 6, I have knocked on over 1,000, probably 1,400 doors. And I can tell you, I'm shocked at the lack of sidewalks in District 6. So I think essential services is a basic part of my platform, meaning the city needs to do what only it can do and do it really, really well. So it's imperative that while our municipality was divided up into voting districts, it's imperative that the representatives legislate with regards to the entire city. And we have to ask difficult questions about, if we do this in X part of the city, how does this impact everyone else? And is it equitable?
Okay. Last question from the editorial board, at least, is if you're elected, what would be your first priority out of the gate?
Ooh, good one. What would be my first priority out of the gate? It would be to learn. I think the first day on any job, it's your job to take in information and to read and to study and to discuss and to listen to experts. So I think my first priority would be to meet with the city manager to understand, and the other council members, and understand basic functions of how the city operates. I feel like I have a fairly good understanding of that. But then the things that are most important to me, we just talked about, are making sure the essential services that we provide are delivered really well. And we have a community safety issue, a community crime problem. Our domestic violence and gang violence rate is well above the national average. And I think we need a strategic approach to that. My background in juvenile justice is unique. I think I bring a unique perspective to that. And I want to get involved in those conversations right away. So I think by nature of where my career has been, that's probably the easiest thing for me to learn about right away. And I want to get a firm grasp on the budget. I've been watching some of the study sessions, and, you know, operating a city of this size is a really large entity. It's a large job and it needs to be taken seriously. So my very first priority, to answer your question, would be to understand basic function and then start making some plans with regards to community safety.
I have a follow-up based on that.
Sure.
Watching the study sessions and learning about the budget, as well as the other issues that you mentioned, what do you see as the biggest budget priority for the city at this point?
Certainly the fact that we need that long-term capital plan. The capital replacement plan is paramount to a healthy functioning municipality. I'm not quite clear on where it was in the past and why we didn't have one in 2020. And I'm not quite clear on all the intricacies of where it went or why it wasn't created. But I think in order to operate effectively and provide quality service in all those areas, our capital expenditures have to be in line. It has to make sense, and we have to have a plan for the future. If fire apparatus will need to be replaced, that's inevitable. The stations will need upgrading, that's inevitable. Basic service, water, sewer, garbage, the infrastructure of those, I think, is probably one of our largest budget priorities.
Thank you for that. And I have one other question before John or Joanna jumps back in. How will you be voting on each of the 3 charter amendments on the ballot? The addition of a attendance requirement for city council members, a slew of charter changes, and then a ban on a local income tax.
The charter changes to get in compliance with state law is an easy one. I will be voting affirmative. Now, the language of the attendance one is tricky. I think it's important that people understand there's a bit of a double negative written in there just based on how they have to write ballot measures. I will be voting for an attendance requirement. Is that clear? Only because I don't have my ballot in front of me and I don't know if it's yes or no, but I will be voting for an attendance requirement. And I will be voting to ban a city income tax.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you. I actually was at that point going to go ahead and turn it over to Kate if you had anything else you'd want to add or ask.
That was all from me. Thank you.
For you. Okay.
I've got one. Watching the council over the past couple of years, there have been some moments with the council members, and watching the kind of personal dynamics between them has been interesting. Obviously, there will be some change coming with this election, but how do you see yourself fitting with that group?
It's a great question, Joanna. I, if elected, would like to raise the level of professionalism a bit. I think that a lot of that distraction was difficult to watch. It was not the best reflection of a really wonderful community. I found it to be somewhat painful at times to watch, and I expect leaders to behave better. So I view my role as participating in elevating the level of professionalism and the level of respect. I think, what our culture in general is missing is the ability to listen to one another without trying to put your thoughts together so quickly that you're not actually listening because you're trying to come back so quickly. So that's important to me.
Any other questions from anybody? No? Well, Ms. Wallace, I go ahead and turn it over to you then for the big wrap up here. If you want to take a few minutes just to kind of say anything you think is important that maybe we didn't cover here.
Sure. I think we've sort of touched on the basics that have bubbled to the top in this campaign. I think I would ask for the community support to do this job. I think I can do I know I can do a good job. I think what's interesting is that I have a really unique background that is really well suited for this. I have a background in public administration where we managed a large public budget, and the public sector is not the same as the private sector. So when people make that old adage, oh, we just need to run it like a business. I think the thought is well intended, but they don't operate the same way. They're not the same thing. I have public sector management experience. And I also own a business and have the privilege of being a job creator and making a payroll every month. I also know how challenging that can be, and certainly has been. I think that makes my background unique. And what also makes it well suited for this position is two of the biggest issues in our community right now that I've heard over and over and over are the housing crisis and gang violence. I think the DV issue to me is just as large, but people aren't as aware of it. It's a more difficult thing to point to and to talk about out loud. That was a side note. But the two biggest challenges for us are the housing crisis and homelessness and gang violence. Just so happens that my professional background is in both of those arenas. Had the privilege of being the interim director at Rod's House for 6 months while they looked for a permanent CEO, working with homeless young people aged 13 to 24, working on the housing action plan, and then obviously being in juvenile corrections for many years makes me uniquely qualified for this job right now at this moment.
All right. Well, thank you. And thanks for taking the time to speak with us. We appreciate it. And this has been the Yakima Herald-Republic's Editorial Board meeting featuring Lisa Wallace, who's seeking the District 6 seat on the Yakima City Council. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.